Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Lunch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me and an opportunity to share today.
Well, just in the time we have gotten to spend together, there's an energy that you have for life that comes through just our call. Has that energy always been there in you that
I
you
would
just had a zest for living?
I would say I was always, pretty energetic and pretty passionate, but I think my life changed a lot at age 40 when
Mm.
I became a Christian and really and serving God and serving Jesus. It was a change in my life during that time. So I'd say the last 26 years, it's been a wonderful season to serve Jesus.
You go back in your story, Mark. You've always been a learner. You've always been somebody who loved to learn. You were senior class president. You went on and you got as many degrees as I think a thermometer. I was writing them all down. I'm going, holy moly, man, he's getting more degrees than I can even write on my page. Is that passion to learn something that you enjoyed during that season of your life?
Yeah, and I still enjoy. I went from high school. I got a bachelor's, master's at Ohio State University, full scholarship. The only child out of four to go to college in all of my family, and then I went straight from there, full scholarship at Cornell University. Got a PhD in biochemistry from an Ivy League university, and even when I graduated with PhD in biochemistry at age 25. I continued my education through all these correspondence.
Mm.
Now you get so many
Yep.
degrees and I ended up getting an MBA, law degree, PhD in economics,
Jeez.
and I just continued. But I tell you, the last 25 years, it's been so different that I tell you the only book that I find that's useful, and the only learning I find useful today is the Bible.
Mm, mm.
So it's definitely changed the last 26 years
That's
in my
so
life.
interesting. It's fascinating because when you hear that part of your story, that you would assume, well, you were just on the fast track to success and life just must have been a smooth, easy, hassle free road for you. But that wasn't the story. At age 32, everything changed for you. Unpack that a little bit. And I want to dive into that part of your story.
Yeah, well, 7 years after I finished Cornell in biochemistry, and I graduated in 1983, Mike, when the at Cornell when the biotech industry was exploding. It's when Genentech started and all the pharmaceutical companies started biotech divisions. There were 10 jobs for every PhD graduate. And, my wife and I met my wife when she was in seventh grade and I was in eighth grade. Both grew up near about an hour north of Cincinnati. And I was senior class president. She was treasurer of her class. She was a
Mm.
year behind me. We both went to Ohio State University after high school. And so, we were during, we got married when we finished Ohio State. And when I got a full scholarship to go to Cornell, we got married at that point. I was 21 and she was 20. And, and I tell you, we working with one car and going to laundromats with quarters. And all of a sudden we graduated 25 and it was like life change,
Mm.
and bought our first home. And I tell you, I got caught up in that world, and I'm going to get into where kind of from age 25 to 32. But by the time I was 32, I was divisional president. This is 7 years after graduating. I was divisional president and corporate vice president of the 56th largest company in America, ADM Archer Daniels Midland, 70 billion, not million, 70 billion in revenue a year, 30,000 employees, number 56 on the Fortune 500. We had a CEO 75 years old, a president 69 years old, and I was 32 and I was ranked number 4 executive
Mm.
of the company out of 32,000 employees. And the other executives above me were all 30 to 40 years my senior, and there are only 3 above me. So that was where I was 7 years after graduation. I got a Falcon 50 my first week working there as divisional president. I had my own jet for 8 years working there. I bought the CEO's home He was a billionaire. He owned 5% of ADM, 30 years as the CEO. But him being 75, he wanted to move to something smaller. So I ended up buying his home my first month there. He gave me a startup bonus to be the down payment, a 13,000 square foot house, an 8-car garage, horse riding stables with an inside arena. And this is all at age 32. I mean, probably the best way to describe it with the jet and the mansion is I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. And I got caught up in that. Yep. And then, then people ask me about my faith during those 8 years of college, going to a secular university, Ohio State, bachelor's, master's, PhD at Cornell, never met one Christian professor in 8 years. So if there was one, they sure didn't share it openly. And the sciences, it was all about evolution. And I was in the science side of things. And evolution, Big Bang Theory, Darwinism, to the point I had some professors at Cornell say, if you believe in God, you can't be a PhD scientist.
Wow.
I had one say, if you believe in God, you can't be in his class. So I started telling my Cornell colleagues, some of the other PhD students, I started telling them my parents are Christians and my parents forced me to go to church. I said they're Christians because they didn't go to college and they don't know better. That's where I was.
So that's where your view on it was then.
Yes.
So if I had met you then, if I had met Mark, I get the polished up Jesus filled Mark now. If I had met Mark at 32 and you had moved in my community and we had run into each other at the grocery store, how would you have come across back then compared to who you are now?
I would have come across my whole identity. My whole identity was that position. Oh, here's my card. I'm divisional president of the 56th largest company in America. And ADM, by the way, is the largest company in Decatur, Illinois, where their headquarters are. Decatur, Illinois is 80,000 citizens live there, and it's 30,000 employees. So, I mean, it's a company town. It's a big fish in a small town. And my whole identity was, for 8 years, I'm divisional president of one of the biggest companies in the world. I mean, I was caught up in the world. It was all that 8-car garage. Within a few months, I had a Ferrari, 2 BMWs, 2 Mercedeses. There were lots of months I was getting $300,000 bonus a month. Lots of months. Because a lot of our income as a corporate executive of a publicly traded company is a lot of your income is in stock options and bonuses. And for 8 years with bonuses and stock options, it was $2 to $3 million a year for 8 years. And that's 32 years ago. Wow. Or 34 years ago. That was 1989.
Golly.
So I was caught up in the world.
And your wife went through a change during that time, correct?
She did.
She talk about that a little bit, because this plays into the story.
Yeah, she explored faith, Mike, when she was in college. And at Cornell, a group called Campus Crusade tried to bring her into that group and kind of recruit her. And I said, Ginger, I'm a PhD student at an Ivy League university, and I'm telling you, God does not exist. I got guys that are up for Nobel Prize winners, professors, and they said God doesn't exist. And I talked her out of it. I kept her completely away from that. But her mom got real sick when Ginger was 30. Her mom was 52 at the time and was in the hospital for 10 months. Her mom was, and became septic with the hysterectomy she was having. They had a medical challenge, and it pierced her gut, and her hydrochloric acid went through her body cavity, and she went septic. So she almost died. She was 10 months in the hospital. Ginger sat by her side for 10 months. Ginger even moved to a hospital near where we lived, and Ginger became a Christian at that time. And I said, Ginger, God doesn't exist. She said, Mark, I'm telling you wrong. God exists, and Jesus is the Son of God, and you're wrong. And she wouldn't listen to me otherwise. And she got active in our church at age 30. She got active with women's Bible study groups. She even led women's Bible study group, as she does now, now. And she got very engaged being a follower of Jesus. And I couldn't convince her otherwise. So during this time, so she's driving a 10-year-old Jeep Cherokee. I've got 8 cars, including a Ferrari. And I remember telling her, I said, Ginger, let me buy you a yellow Ferrari. I can get it with one bonus next month. Bonus, buy you a yellow Ferrari. I got a red one. And she said, Mark, I want to be a good steward for God. And I didn't even know what that meant. It was like hearing Latin. So she had nothing to do with it. The materialism was embarrassed to her, and all she talked about that she was praying for me, and she was a good steward for wanted to be a good steward for God, and she was worried about the track I was on.
Wow. So I want to pause there because for so many people, when they have a radical change, they push the people closest to them away. But she did something right. You weren't ready yet. You were going to be, but you weren't ready yet. What did she do right with her faith that marked you the most, even when you didn't believe like she believed? What did she do right with her faith?
I would say this, and my mom and dad too, because I grew up in a Christian home.
Mm.
But I just, like I said, I thought they were Christians by the time I was in college because they didn't go to college. They
Yep.
didn't know what I was thinking. And by the time I was 20, they prayed for me. They
Wow.
prayed for me and never gave up. And Ginger just kept praying for me, kept planting and kept planting seeds and just never gave up. And then after a couple years into the company, I started sharing with her. Now the company announced, and I was on front cover of Fortune magazine, and boy, I was caught up in that. You know, people probably wrapping fish in it the next day, but boy, I had a frame in my office. You know, I was caught up in the world.
Yep.
When you're, it becomes a little bit world of narcissism when you're an executive that level, that age, and well beyond what I ever dreamed that I'd be, 7 years out of college. So I'm a couple years at the company in my own jet, the mansion, 8-car garage, 2 to 3 million a year every year with bonuses and stock options on top of my base salary. And I started sharing with Ginger how they put in Fortune magazine that I'm going to be the next COO, go from divisional president to company president, because he was 30 years my senior. And someone 10 years older than me, they were groomed to be the CEO and me to be the COO from number 4 to number 2. And I said, but to do this, now that they see me as part of the family, I said, they're equipping me to take over this international cartel, this price fixing scheme that's been going on for about 12 years. And at their age, our CEO's now 77. Keep in mind, I'm 2 years at the company now, so he's not 75 anymore. He's 77, and they're equipping me to take this over and mentoring me. We all need mentors in our life, but show me your mentors, I'll show you your future.
Yep.
I had good mentors in part of my life, but at this point, I had mentors that shown me how to do price fixing and an international cartel. And I shared with Ginger that what was going on. And she said, now, Mark, is that legal? This is November 5th, 1992, 2 years with the company. And I said, well, Ginger, it's not legal, but everybody does it. If you're in the commodity business, they tell me this is what you got to do. And for me to become the president and COO of the company, I've got to learn this because they've been doing it for 12 years. And she said, well, Mark, how much does the company earn doing this? I said, they earn hundreds of millions of dollars a year extra on top of their $4 billion revenue. Or I'm sorry, $70 billion revenue, $4 billion profit. And I said, sometimes even earning $1 billion a year doing this. But I have to do it because if I don't do it, I'm not going to move up. This is what I've got to do to take the place of the top executives. And she said, well, who pays for this extra hundreds of millions of dollars a year? And I said, the consumers do, because ADM's the largest food additive company in the world. Ingredients in all your listeners' foods, Kellogg's cereal, Pillsbury, Kraft, orange juices, iced teas. It's difficult to buy a food or beverage that doesn't have something from Archer Daniels Midland in it. So I said the consumers pay for this because when a Kellogg's pays higher for ingredients, their profit margins built in. They just charge a higher price for the cereal. So the consumers are paying for this. And she said, you mean my grandma on $200 a week, Social Security is paying for this, and we live in a mansion and a corporate jet in an 8-car garage? She said, Mark, I don't know if I can live with this. Keep in mind, she's a Christian already a few years by this point. And then she told me she was going to go back in her study and pray about it. We talk about it later. And I knew then I was in trouble when she told me she was going to pray about it.
You're like, this is not going to turn out well.
Whenever she prayed about something, it did not turn out good for me
Yes.
during that season of my life.
And so when she came back to you and said, you got to make a decision, I got to turn you in, what were the emotions you felt in that moment when this little girl who you have loved since growing up in Ohio, and now those little eyeballs are looking at you saying, we're not living like this? What were the emotions you felt?
I tell you, I felt so. And I said, I remember telling her, I said, Ginger, I could go to prison for price fixing. It's illegal. It's illegal to do this. This is anti-breaking antitrust laws. I could go to prison, but I said, more importantly, the CEO is a billionaire. I said he was best friends with President Clinton, who was president at the time. I said he's on the phone a couple times a month with the U.S. president. He flew to President Nixon's funeral on President Clinton's plane. I said this company and this man will destroy us. One of the most
Mm,
powerful men,
mm,
kind of as Jeffrey Bezos, Bill
yep.
Gates level at that time, in
Yep.
1992. I said he will destroy us. And I never forget her saying her CEO is bigger than my CEO, and her CEO is Jesus. I never forget that response. Never forget. And I said, Ginger, I can't see Jesus. I can't feel Jesus. I can't talk to him. I don't know him. I don't even think he exists. But our CEO lived in this home for 30 years, and he's 7 miles down the road
Yep.
right now, and they're going to destroy us. And she said, God will protect us, but we're going to do it. And we're going to do it today because I'd rather be homeless than live in a home where illegal activity is occurring. That was her reply.
Good night. You could take 800 classes on ethics and not see someone live it out that well, because the easiest answer is go along to get along. I'll get out of this later. If you had stayed in it longer without doing what you did, what would have changed about Mark Whitacre?
Here's what I think would have happened. Only God knows what would have happened. Here's what I think would have happened. I would have become COO of the company because that was already in Nelson Fortune. They had their succession plan in place. A few years later, I would have become COO of the company and president, number two executive instead of number four. Would have been making 10 million a year, which the COO made instead of 3 million a year. I think I would have lost my, would have never, no, Jesus would never had
Mm,
eternal life in
mm,
heaven. I think I would have lost my family because most of those executives were on their third or fourth marriages. I think I would have lost my family, um, especially with Ginger, a Christian. And who knows? I mean, it could have been even maybe bigger in the next Enron case or WorldCom case.
yep.
Could even become worse down the road. But I think I would have been still caught up in the world and lost my family in that journey.
November 5th, 1992, you went from just a general sharing with her conversation about being brought in to some internal things to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, sitting in your home. What transpired from that point for the next 3 years that literally, when we say changed your life, changed your trajectory, changed your future, changed your eternity ultimately? But what happened when the FBI showed up that made this such a massive bombshell?
Well, I had two choices after Ginger sitting by my side and I shared what was going on. I had to either wear a wire for the FBI and go after the kingpins who were, I was only 7 months involved at that point. So I had to either wear a wire and share, go, help expose the kingpins that were mentoring me what to do, or I had to be arrested. And I decided to wear a wire every day, Monday through Friday for 3 years. 1992 to 1995, the longest duration by wire in history, has all the equipment I wanted to cover at the FBI Museum in Washington, D.C., and became the largest price fixing case in U.S. history, $1 billion theft a year for 12 years, started by a stay at home mom raising three young children, my wife, Ginger. And I had a choice at the end of that, a 6 month plea agreement, a deal of a lifetime, 6 months of Martha Stewart sentenced to go in at age 38 after wearing a wire for 3 years, go in at 38, come out at 38. My wife begged me to sign that plea agreement, and I would have went for 6 months, white collar camp, no fence, just like Martha Stewart did. And I told my wife, it's all her fault I'm in this mess. I've had to wear a wire 3 years because of her. I ripped up the plea agreement, fired the lawyer who recommended it, went to court for 3 years and fought the case in the courts for 3 years and got 8.5 years in prison instead for not taking responsibility. And I would have had 6 months in prison. And I was so depressed, Mike, I pulled my car in one of those garages and I tried to kill myself. I tried to end my life, wrote a letter to Ginger and my 3 kids and tried to kill myself. I was hopeless and helpless and at the end of myself by that point. And it's amazing how life started changing at that point.
Isn't it funny? You think of the prodigal son moments, and I think the most powerful part of Luke 15 is when it says, and he came to his senses. Why did you have to lose everything? You're going from millions of dollars a year now to how much did you make a week in prison?
$20 a month for 8 years.
$20 a month.
2 to 3 million a year for 8 years, and now $20 a month for 8 years.
You go from the magazine covers to nobody knows your name anymore. You are, and those that do probably hate your guts, those that knew you so well. Why do you think you had to lose it to find it? What would you say?
I tell you, I think those, looking back and reflecting back all those now 3 decades plus, I think that I was so caught up in the world, it was like an addiction. It really was. I'd buy a Ferrari, and 2 weeks later, that wasn't enough. I'd say, what's next? What's next? I'm trying to fill it with all these false idols and all this materialism, just like someone would alcohol or drugs. For me, it was greed. And I was trying to fill it with materialism, and I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon. When to the world, I had everything. But really, I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon that wasn't filled until I got to know God and became a Christian and in prison. And a guy named Ian Howes of CBMC reached out to me a month after I attempted suicide. And he was CFO of a biotech company. And I was 7 months before going to prison. He said, Mark, prison is going to be the beginning of your life, and you're going to find your true purpose in your life with the journey ready to start. This is a month after I attempted suicide. I'm 40 years of age at this point. And I said, Ian, I'm about ready to go to prison for 8.5 years, most of my 40s. I'm going in at 40 and getting out at 48. And he said, Mark, I'm telling you, it's the beginning of your life. And he started taking me through a Bible study, Operation Timothy, introduced me to God, introduced me to Jesus. And it started giving me some hope. He was spending hours a week with me, several hours a week with me. But I tell you, I still had that block with my education for 8 years, telling me there is no God in the sciences. And then Chuck Colson showed up my second week in prison, and God put him in my life. So Ian Howes to plant those seeds about God and Jesus. And then Chuck Colson, who went to Brown, where I went to Cornell, and he was also told in the Ivy League, there is no God. And he went 7 years. He got a law degree. So he went, just a year shorter than I did. Also came out not believing in God. And I tell you, he became a Christian and right before he went to prison in the Watergate scandal in the 70s. He was White House counsel under President Nixon. And 20 years later, he's sitting with me. And I told him about what I'm learning from Ian. And I said, but Chuck, I've got 8 years of college telling me there's no God. And I can't erase that. And he said, Mark, do you think there's a PhD scientist who believes in God? And I said, I don't think there is one in the world. And he started article after article, book after book, discipling with me some of the best scientists in the world that believe in God and believe in Jesus that the universities never talked about. Even Francis Collins, who discovered the human genome, a Christian. Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe and God could create man. They sure never taught me that at Cornell. Sir Isaac Newton wrote as much about Jesus as he did about science. They sure never taught me that at Cornell. And dozens of articles and books to the point I got down on my knees in June of 1998, 3 months in prison after being discipled by Ian and Chuck. And I said, how can you be a PhD scientist and not believe in God after everything I've just seen? And it changed my life forever. June 4th, 1998. I'll never forget that. 3 months in prison. I've got 8 years yet to go. And it changed my life forever. At $20 a month, I couldn't wait to get up and start taking inmates through Operation Timothy, because I had a captive audience, 24 hours a day free time we all had.
That's
And they
right.
couldn't wait to sign up for Operation Timothy. And it became the most productive years of my life. I helped them get GEDs, and some of them get 2-year degrees. For the first time in my life, I found myself helping somebody else besides myself. And it took that. And it's amazing. It's like I became a free man in prison. The prison was that life of greed that I was in before I went to prison, that materialism and this, that your whole life is title and size of house and what size company you're working for. And now I'm in prison at $20 a month, a free man.
Mm. Mm. You know, when you think back now to that time, the prayers your wife was praying, the prayers I'm sure your parents were praying, did you ever dream that those prayers would ultimately be answered in a way you never would have chosen for them to be answered? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been great for all those prayers to be answered while you're still making 10 million a year if you got the COO job, but that's not what it took. And that's not everybody's prescription, but that was definitely yours. Your wife literally took her vows, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, seriously. Who would Mark be without her in your story? What would you say?
It would be an empty life. God so blessed me with Ginger that she stuck to me through thick and thin. And she even never forgets when she came. She visited me every weekend. She moved to 3 different states to be next to 3 different prisons to bring my kids and visit me every Friday night and every Saturday and Sunday when families can come in the visiting room. And she'll never forget when she came after I gave my life to Jesus, when all the weekends before I'm blaming her or ADM or the FBI, always pointing fingers, when I said, I've got no one to blame but myself. No
Wow.
one put a gun to my head. I could have left the company, walked away. No one put a gun to my head and said I had to be involved with illegal activity to move up the corporate ladder. I could have went working somewhere else. And I said, Ginger, I've got no one to blame but myself. And that was the weekend after that, June 4th, 1998, when I surrendered to Jesus, and our healing started happening. And I got to know my kids in prison like I never known them before. And they're all older than I was even now at this point. Our youngest is 37. I was,
Wow.
32 when all this was happening. And we're married 44 years, Mike.
That's
And then I
amazing.
prayed. I said, God, I'm $20 a month. My wife's been a stay-at-home mom for 10 years as we had young children. I said, I pray that they can be taken care of while I'm in prison for 8 years. And God blessed us. A few months later, still in 1998, I went to prison in 98. The companies, after we all were found guilty, about 30 of us went to prison, 4 from ADM alone. After we were all found guilty, the companies were so appreciative of my wife, Tyson Foods and Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and Mount Air Poultry and Purdue Farms. They were so appreciative of my wife, and they won hundreds of millions of dollars back. ADM paid $400 million alone just for corn sweetener in the beverage industry. But
Wow.
they paid about $3 billion back in class action suits. Those companies gave my wife a whistleblower reward and financed her the 8 years I was in prison for her and my kids, because they were so appreciative of Ginger stopping the biggest price fixing case in U.S. history. So God took care of that when I was in prison.
And her CEO was bigger than your CEOs. And she really did mean it, didn't she?
Yes, she did. And she
Wow.
still does. And I do too. And her CEO is bigger, and it's Jesus.
It
And there's no
is.
doubt in my mind about that. So he took care of everything financially. Our marriage healed. I learned air conditioning and heating and in prison, because I thought maybe with a PhD in biochemistry, I thought, well, who's going to hire somebody
Yep.
48 convicted felon with an Ivy League PhD? I've got to find how to make a living for my family. So I learned heating and air conditioning in prison. But biotech companies started visiting me in prison. God bless me with that. And they had me review their patents and strategic plans. And some of those companies offered me a job the day I got out.
Mm.
And I started with a cancer research company, a biotech company with a Christian CEO. And after 4 promotions, I became the COO and the number 2 executive of that company for a decade. And I'm
Wow.
still on their advisory board today.
That is amazing. It really is amazing. So, what would you tell? Let's say there's a guy or a young lady driving into work right now, and they are where you were, allured, um, but they know something's not right. They know ethically they don't match up to some things they're watching. And it may be not illegal, but it's not right. And it's not sitting well with them. What would you tell them?
I would tell them that if they're at a level where they could stop it, if they're at an executive level where they could stop it, they need to find a way to stop it.
Hmm.
If they're at a level where they can't stop it, like middle management or lower, and they feel they can't change it, I would recommend them to leave, to walk away, go work for somewhere else that has the right ethical compass, the right moral compass. Don't sell their soul. Don't sell their soul just for a job or for a paycheck or for a bonus. Don't do that because they got to look at themselves in the mirror. Even if they're not doing it, they know it's happening. So they're part of it, but I know it's happening. I would walk away from that company. But also, if they're just caught up in greed, if it's
Hmm.
not anything to do with unethical, if they're caught up in the world, I would tell them, and they're thinking, what's next? There's got to be more to life than this. I was there. I was there. And if they're trying to fulfill it with moving up the corporate ladder, it won't fulfill it.
That's right.
To me, the only answer, and I've learned it through experience, the only answer is Jesus.
Mm, mm.
That's only Jesus is the only one that can fill that void and give them purpose in their life. I found purpose even in prison through
That's right.
Jesus.
That's so good. That is so good. When you were going in every day, and there's been a movie made by Matt Damon stars you, of course, in the movie. I mean,
Yeah,
now
my
that I get
twin.
to, yeah, y'all look just alike. It's amazing. My wife would have wanted to be on set every day. So that's good that probably Ginger's better. Um, as you think back on those days, what kind of fear ruled you when you were wiring up every day to go in? What kind of fears were you dealing with internally during that time?
Yeah, the FBI, and they did it. They were the FBI, the 3 agents I worked undercover with every day for 3 years, Monday through Friday for 3 years, was very upset with the movie. The movie director was an atheist, but even just the crime drama, he made it look comical, fun, and almost like an Ocean's 11, Ocean's
Yeah.
12 flavor. And he did the Ocean's 11 and 12, so he did it kind of that tone. And the FBI was so upset because they did a documentary to combat the movie on Discovery Channel. And that's the 3 real FBI agents. They also brought Ginger and I and interviewed us. And people watch the documentary on markwhitaker.com on our
Yep.
homepage, Investigation Discovery, and watch a movie. Say it's 2 different stories because there the FBI says, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you. This is a serious case, hundreds of millions of dollars involved, billions of dollars over years. This is a serious case. If you're caught wearing a wire, they're going to kill you. And to hear that 2 or 3 times a week for 3 years took a tremendous toll. Prison was a cakewalk compared to wearing a wire. I mean, I was a basket case. People at work, I lost 60 pounds wearing a wire. I was falling apart. People at work thought I had cancer. They said, Mark, you need to see a doctor. I was literally falling apart during that time. Most stress and most pressure in my life, especially not having God in your life and relying on yourself and then being told you'd be killed if you're caught. It was tremendous pressure. And Ginger just kept praying and said, God will protect us.
When you think about the peace that you have now, you meet Jesus, you begin that journey with Jesus, you're discipled. When you compare all that you went through to that peace that you have now, the peace of, he's got you, the peace of your future, the peace of, you're living for a purpose way bigger than you. Was it worth going through all that to get the peace that you have now?
Absolutely,
Mm,
Mike.
mm.
Ginger and I look back, and one of the most common questions we get: what happened if you signed that 6-month plea agreement? All you had to do is
Yep,
sign.
that's right.
Go in at 38, come out at 38. Ginger was mad. She said murder was on the table, even though divorce wasn't, that I didn't sign it. But looking back, she says, I say, our children says, thank God I
Mm,
did not
mm.
sign it, because
Wow.
I would have not listened to Ian Howes. I would have not listened to Chuck Colson with a 6-month sentence, that I had to be broken. I had to be the end of myself, and God gave me exactly what I needed. We look back and say, thank God I was not enabled, and take that 6-month sentence and not been broken. Probably would have got out, lost my family at some point, and not had eternal life, not become a Christian. We thank God for that brokenness today. And now, the last 5 years, Mike, I work for Coca-Cola Consolidated. Our purpose statement: we're the bottling side, largest bottler in America. Different CEO. Frank Harrison's our CEO and chairman. Different CEO than Coca-Cola Company. Different board of directors. Different ownership. We're on the NASDAQ. They're on the New York Stock Exchange. And our purpose statement is to think about where God put me. And by the way, the largest victims of the price fixing case was corn sweetener, where ADM had to pay $400 million. I worked for a company I stole from 30 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm vice president of the company, culture and care. Report right to the chairman's department. And our purpose statement is to honor God in all we do. Think about it. Honor God all we do in a publicly traded company, by serving others, pursuing excellence, and growing profitably. We have 104 plant sites, a chaplain in every plant. We have dozens of prayer groups and Bible studies. It's discipleship ongoing in the company, and mentoring and discipleship of faith-based mentoring, like I was mentored and discipled. And I tell you, it's been life changing. And then we have T Factor, which we actually help equip others. We
Yep.
over 3,000 this year alone, CEOs and senior leaders, to help equip them to help have a faith-based, purpose-driven company. And it's been life changing. I get to wake up every day and to go do God's work, and nothing more exciting than serving Jesus. And I felt that way the last 26 years.
That's so amazing. And it's hard for me to not see you as that, right? I mean, that's just, you can feel the ready to get up every day piece of you. Like there's a purpose. There's a verse, Mark, in the book of Acts, and it says this, that David served his purpose in his generation, then he fell asleep. What do you believe was the ultimate purpose that God created Mark Whitacre for?
I feel it falls in 3 scriptures. I feel, and I've prayed about this for 26 years, and I had 24 hours a day for 8 years in prison to pray about this, because I was Christian my first year in
Yep.
prison after my 3rd month in '98. And I tell you, God led me to this, and I believe this is a purpose of all of our lives. Is 2 Corinthians 5:20. As a Christian, we're Christ's ambassadors. We're an ambassador here for Jesus here on earth until we join him in heaven. And as 2 Corinthians 5:20 so clearly says, the only question is, as a believer, you're God's ambassador. The only question is, are we going to be effective or ineffective? Are we going to be in the field in the game, or in the stands watching the game? I want to be an effective ambassador for Christ. And I believe the way we do that is 2 scriptures. Is Matthew 28:19. Go make disciples of all nations. That's plant seeds. I share my testimony, even sometimes in an Uber car, a 3-minute version, and then at prayer breakfast is a 30-minute version around the world. I just spoke in Korea in August. They had 2,600 people in the audience in South Korea. But to plant seeds to non-believers about where I share, for example, I share my journey that Jesus exists, and there's no doubt in my mind, and how I was caught up in the world, and I share my testimony. And then I believe 2 Timothy 2:2 is the other scripture, how we live that out, where Paul told Timothy, believers, both believers, take what you've learned from me and go share with others. I believe our purpose is evangelism and discipleship, plant seeds to non-believers, and then to believers, to help them grow in their faith, to become the men and women that God designed them to be. And evangelism and discipleship, being Christ ambassadors, I believe is the purpose of all our lives. And when I get up and go to work in the morning, I say, pray, God, I pray you put someone in my path, many people today that don't know you, and you speak through me to plant seeds, and ones that do know you, you speak through me to help encourage them to continue to become the ambassadors that God designed them to be. And I think that's the purpose of our lives, all of us. And the workplace is a ministry. It's a mission field.